Welcome to True Crime Threads. Today, a deadly obsession leads to a tragic murder. Jason was a well-known figure in his small town, where he had spent years building a reputation as the local baker. Every morning, the scent of freshly baked bread and pastries would drift out of his quaint shop, drawing in customers from all over. Jason's bakery was a beloved part of the community, and he was known for his warm smile and friendly nature. But while his business flourished, his personal life was far more complicated. Several years earlier, Jason had been in a relationship with Sarah, a woman he had cared for deeply. They had shared many good times, but ultimately their relationship ended. They parted ways on good terms, agreeing that they were better off going their separate directions. Sarah, however, had never fully gotten over Jason. The breakup had hurt her deeply, and though she tried to move on, she often found herself thinking about him, even after the years had passed. Recently, Jason had reconnected with Sarah. It wasn't something he had planned, but one day she reached out to him with a simple message asking how he was doing. Jason, always the kind-hearted person, didn't think much of it and agreed to meet for coffee. They spent a few hours catching up, reminiscing about old times, and sharing what had happened in their lives since they last saw each other. It seemed harmless at first, and Jason appreciated the chance to reconnect with an old friend. During their meeting, however, Jason realized that Sarah hadn't truly moved on. She spoke in a way that revealed lingering feelings for him. She was still holding on to their past, and Jason, feeling awkward and uncomfortable, tried to steer the conversation away from their former relationship. He reassured her that they were both in different places now and that their breakup had been for the best. Sarah, though, was not so easily convinced. Jason had recently started seeing someone new, a woman named Laura, and their relationship was still in the early stages. Jason was excited about the possibilities with Laura. She was kind, funny, and brought out a side of him that he hadn't felt in years. But it was clear that Sarah's feelings for Jason hadn't faded, and hearing about Laura stirred up old emotions. Jason tried to explain that he was happy with his new relationship, but Sarah's response was distant. She didn't seem to be listening, and that's when Jason began to feel a sense of unease. He brushed it off, thinking it was just an emotional reaction, but deep down he knew something wasn't quite right. The days following Jason's meeting with Sarah were filled with an unsettling tension. At first, it seemed as if everything had returned to normal. Jason focused on his bakery, pouring his energy into his work and spending time with Laura. She had quickly become a significant part of his life, and their budding relationship brought him joy. He was starting to believe that maybe he had finally found something special again. But Sarah's behavior began to spiral, and it wasn't long before Jason realized that things were not as they seemed. It started with small, odd occurrences that seemed innocent at first. Jason began receiving mysterious messages on his phone. The texts were vague, sometimes cryptic, but always signed with Sarah's name. At first, Jason dismissed them, assuming she was just struggling to accept the end of their relationship. The messages were not threatening, but they left him feeling uneasy, as if Sarah couldn't let go of the past. One day, as Jason was closing the bakery, he spotted Sarah standing across the street, watching him. She wasn't making an attempt to talk to him, but her gaze lingered, almost as if she were waiting for something. It made Jason uncomfortable. The next morning, when he arrived at the bakery, he found a note on the counter. It was handwritten in Sarah's familiar handwriting, but it wasn't signed. The note contained a cryptic message: "You can't just walk away from me." Not like this. Jason felt a growing sense of dread. He had known Sarah for years, but this felt different. It was as if she had crossed a line, her actions becoming more obsessive and controlling. He tried to brush it off, telling himself that maybe he was overthinking things. But the unease continued to gnaw at him. His suspicions were confirmed when he began seeing Sarah more frequently around town. She showed up at places he visited regularly, at the coffee shop, at the park, even near his apartment. She would often be just a few steps behind him, always watching but never approaching. Jason tried to confront her a few times, but she always had an excuse. She claimed she was just passing by or needed some fresh air, but Jason didn't buy it. Laura, too, began noticing Sarah's strange behavior. She grew concerned, urging Jason to take action and distance himself from his ex-girlfriend. But Jason, wanting to avoid confrontation, brushed it off. He didn't want to make things worse or stir up unnecessary drama. But Sarah's presence was becoming more frequent, and Jason couldn't ignore the growing sense of danger. It was clear that Sarah's feelings for him had transformed into something darker, something Jason was not prepared to face. As the days went on, the incidents surrounding Sarah's behavior became more troubling. Jason's once peaceful life was now filled with an underlying sense of paranoia. At first, it had been just small signs, stray notes, brief sightings, but soon, Sarah's presence began to feel inescapable. He would find himself constantly looking over his shoulder, wondering if she was watching him, waiting for a moment to approach. One afternoon, as Jason was closing up the bakery, he saw her standing outside his shop. She was staring at him through the window with an almost vacant expression, her eyes locked on his. Jason felt a chill run down his spine. He had never seen Sarah like this before. Her usual warmth had been replaced with something cold, something he couldn't quite place. He walked to the door, intending to speak with her and ask her to leave. But before he could say anything, she simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The next few days were filled with more of the same. Jason couldn't go anywhere without encountering Sarah. He'd see her standing across the street when he left the bakery, or she would be at the park when he went for his usual walk. At first it seemed harmless, but the constant sightings began to feel suffocating. He started to wonder if she was purposefully making herself known to him, trying to provoke some sort of reaction. Jason became more tense, more withdrawn. He couldn't concentrate on his work the way he used to, and his conversations with Laura became strained. She noticed the change in him and asked if everything was all right, but Jason kept brushing her off, telling her that it was nothing. It wasn't long before Sarah's behavior escalated. Jason began receiving phone calls from unknown numbers, each one leaving a brief, cryptic message. "You can't just walk away from me," one message said. Another simply repeated Jason's name over and over like a chant. He tried to block the numbers, but the calls continued. It was clear that Sarah wasn't taking rejection well. She was growing more obsessive, more relentless. One evening, after he had closed the bakery and was walking home, Jason felt an overwhelming sense of dread. He looked around, his heart racing, as though someone was following him. He turned a corner and saw Sarah was standing in the shadows, waiting. He froze for a moment, not knowing how to react. She stepped forward, her eyes cold and distant. Jason tried to speak, to tell her that he needed space, but Sarah's face remained unchanged. She simply stared at him, her voice quiet but firm. "You'll see. You'll regret this." With that, she turned and walked away. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Her words lingered in his mind long after she was gone. He wasn't sure what she meant, but he had a sinking feeling that this wasn't the last time he'd hear from Sarah. Something dark was brewing, and Jason feared it was about to get much worse. The morning after Sarah's chilling words echoed in Jason's mind, the town was rocked by devastating news. Jason had been found dead in his apartment, brutally murdered in what appeared to be a fit of violent rage. The police quickly arrived at the scene, and it didn't take long for the investigation to focus on Sarah. Jason's friends, colleagues, and even Laura all spoke of her strange behavior in the weeks leading up to the murder. Everyone had noticed her obsession with Jason, but no one had imagined it would escalate to such a horrifying end. The police discovered that Sarah had been spotted near Jason's apartment the night before his death. Witnesses reported seeing her lingering in the area, and security footage from nearby stores showed her walking past Jason's building several times. The authorities soon uncovered the fact that she had been in constant contact with Jason, sending him unsettling messages and making threatening phone calls. Sarah's obsessive behavior had taken a dark turn, and it was clear that her fixation on Jason had consumed her entirely. It was revealed that the night before the murder, Sarah had been waiting for Jason in his apartment building. She had planned to confront him one final time, her anger and jealousy growing to an uncontrollable level. She had learned of his relationship with Laura and felt betrayed by his ability to move on so easily. In her mind, Jason still belonged to her, and anyone who threatened that would have to be eliminated. When Jason arrived home that night, he was met with Sarah standing in the hallway, her eyes wild with rage. The confrontation that followed was violent and swift. Jason, though shocked by her presence, tried to reason with Sarah, urging her to calm down. But her jealousy and hatred had taken over completely. She lunged at him, attacking with a knife she had brought along for the confrontation. Jason struggled, but Sarah was relentless, stabbing him repeatedly in a frenzy. The brutality of the attack was staggering. There was no mercy, only blind rage. Jason's life ended in those few moments, his body left cold and lifeless in his apartment. After the murder, Sarah went into hiding. She had planned everything carefully, but her actions were so violent that she could not hide her guilt for long. The police quickly connected the dots, and it became clear that she had been the one to take Jason's life. Her obsession had driven her to murder, and now the quiet town was left in shock, grappling with the loss of a beloved figure. Sarah's arrest was swift, but the community was left to question how someone who had once been so familiar, so close, could transform into a killer. The town would never be the same, haunted by the brutal crime and the haunting question of what had driven Sarah to such madness. As Sarah was arrested, the town was left in shock, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what had just occurred. Jason, the beloved baker who had been a part of the community for years, was gone, his life taken by someone who had once been close to him. The tragedy seemed impossible to grasp, and the investigation into Sarah's motives continued to uncover disturbing details. When the police searched Sarah's home, they found a collection of letters thick, crumpled envelopes filled with pages of obsessive writings. These letters were written to herself, documenting the months leading up to the murder. In them, Sarah had poured out her feelings of betrayal and heartache, her jealousy of Laura, and her growing fixation on Jason. The letters revealed that Sarah had not only been unable to move on from their past relationship, but she had been planning something far darker. She had convinced herself that Jason still loved her, and that his relationship with Laura was an unforgivable offense. The letters were chilling, filled with vengeful thoughts and a deep sense of entitlement. Sarah had believed, in her mind, that Jason owed her something, an explanation, a reunion, or at the very least, an acknowledgement that their past wasn't so easily discarded. She had convinced herself that killing him was the only way to make him understand how deeply she had been hurt. In her twisted thinking, Jason's death would somehow bring her the closure she so desperately needed. As the investigation deepened, the authorities discovered that Sarah had been planning the murder for months. She had even taken the time to study Jason's schedule, learning when he would be alone at his apartment. The police were able to trace the purchase of the knife used in the attack, and they found that Sarah had deliberately chosen a time when no one would be around to stop her. She had meticulously prepared for the moment, believing that her actions were justified. In the aftermath of the murder, the town struggled to come to terms with the horror that had unfolded. Jason's friends and family were devastated, unable to fathom how someone they had once trusted could be capable of such a brutal act. Laura, in particular, was left heartbroken and confused, her grief compounded by the fact that she had been unknowingly caught in the middle of Sarah's obsession. As Sarah stood trial, the town tried to heal, but the scars left by the tragedy would never fade. Jason's death had served as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked obsession, of how love can twist into something dark and destructive. Sarah's crime, once unimaginable, had shaken the very foundations of their peaceful community. The question lingered: how could someone so familiar, so close, be capable of taking another's life in such a cold and calculated way?